the Laughing Cavalier here, presenting to you another tale of these troubled times. Today, I shall be looking at a different time period from what I usually cover, and will be telling the story of two of the most interesting survivors of the sinking of the Lusitania, Avis Dolphin and Ian Holbourn. Avis Gertrude Dolphin was born on the 24th of August 1902 in Rotherham, Yorkshire. Her father had fought in the Boer War, contracting an illness whilst there that eventually led to his death in 1906. Her mother moved with her 3 children to the town of St Thomas in Ontario, Canada, where she ran a nursing home. In 1915, when Avis was 12, her mother decided to send her home to England so she could receive a proper British education. 2 nurses, Sarah Smith and Hilda Ellis, who worked for Avis's mother, would accompany her to England, where she would then live with her grandparents whilst attending a school in Scarborough. On the 1st of May 1915, she boarded the RMS Lusitania, the pride of the Cunard Line. Avis, however, soon came down with seasickness, and spent a lot of the time either confined to her cabin or in the second-class lounge. Around about the 4th of May, Avis was lying in the lounge, suffering from another bout of seasickness. Seated nearby was the Professor Ian Stroughton Holbourn. Holbourn was born on the 5th of November 1872. He was something of an eccentric figure. In 1900, after he passed by the island on the trip to the Arctic, he purchased the Isle of Foula, one of the least populated parts of the Shetland Islands, and declared himself the Laird of the Isle, even creating his own tartan, which he would often wear. In 1905, he married Marion Constance Archer Shepherd, and had 3 sons with her. The family would split their time between Foula and his house town in Edinburgh, often using his private yacht to travel to and from the island, which came in handy when he had to rush food supplies to Foula. Having studied at Oxford, he became a professor on the history of art, helping found Ruskin College, and then spending a lot of time lecturing in the United States. My favourite quote of his is regarding his opinion on clothing of the era. In an interview for the Chicago Tribune, he lamented that how terrible modern clothing had become, stating that the shrinking from responsibility and individual action are growing more and more prevalent, are ruining our ideas of beauty as well as our moral characteristics. They are leading to socialism. Men are so ruled by convention and are so afraid of making fools of themselves that they end in being nothing but fools. I advise dressmakers and tailors to go back to the past and study it. There they will find costuming enormously better than that of today. With a man like this, I think you can see why I wanted to make this video. Holbourn had also had some experience with shipwrecks before. On the 8th of September 1914, RMS Oceanic of the White Star Line sank just off the coast of Foula, and Holbourn witnessed this event, although the Admiralty covered up this sinking. From then on, he became obsessed with proper safety when sailing. In May 1915, he was returning from a lecture tour of America, and had with him the manuscript for his new book, The Fundamental Theory of Beauty, which he had been working on for 20 years and hoped to publish in 1916. On board the Lusitania, while sitting in the lounge, he noticed that Avis was ill, and, with no sign of any parent, decided to ask if he could get her anything. Avis initially said she didn't need anything, but Holbourn was persistent and fetched a deck chair and a pillow wrapped in the shawl. When she was comfortable, he decided to cheer her up with stories of his island, his 3 sons, and other stories. Avis was greatly amused by his storytelling, thinking how interesting it would have been for her younger brother Jack to have heard these stories. Avis and Holbourn became fast friends. Since Avis had no family on board, Holbourn decided to take special care of her, particularly since he had a grim sense of foreboding. The day the Lusitania sailed, the German embassy had posted a notice warning all ships sailing in British waters that there was a risk that they would be sunk by U-boats. Holbourn himself had dreamed 3 times that the ship would be torpedoed and, well remembering the Oceanic, tried his best to ensure people were prepared in case of that event. He had tried to warn the passengers about knowing about proper evacuation procedures and on how to put on their life jackets properly. In response, a deputation soon came, ordering to stop talking about such things, since it was worrying the passengers. Holbourn nicknamed this group of people the Ostrich Club. The following day he directly complained to Captain Turner, but the captain did not welcome his views. The voyage, however, went well, and Avis, thanks to Holbourn's stories, seemed to recover from her seasickness. On the night of Thursday, 6th of May, there was a talent contest for the children of 1st and 2nd class. This voyage in particular had seen a large amount of children on the voyage. An 8-year-old girl called Ailsa Booth Jones went up to Ian and showed off all the badges she had won. Sadly, she would be lost in the tragedy that would follow. The morning of Friday, 7th of May 1915 was rather foggy. Just off the old head of Kinsale was the German U-boat U-20, commanded by Captain Lieutenant Walter Schweiger. He had already sunk 2 ships during his voyage and was now preparing to head back to Germany. The fog, though, soon lifted. A few hours later, at 1:20, he sighted a large steamer with 4 funnels which was soon identified as the Lusitania. He dived and moved ahead to intercept. At 2:10, Schweiger ordered 1 torpedo fired. Meanwhile, aboard the Lusitania, Avis and Holbourn were finishing up lunch and preparing for dessert. In an interview made in 1981, Avis described what happened next.
We were enjoying a delicious lunch, which was simply marvellous. The meals were all marvellous on the boat, when suddenly the whole boat was shaken by a tremendous blow. Some people say there were 2 torpedoes, but my recollection is that there was only one.
Everyone immediately rushed for the boat deck, except for Holbourn, who told Avis to wait for the rush to die down. After that, they went up one deck where Holbourn's cabin was. Avis's was on a lower deck, and it would have lost them valuable time if they had gone down there. He returned with his most valuable manuscripts and some life jackets. He put one on Avis and offered his own to Sarah Smith, but she refused, stating that Holbourn had family and that he should save himself. They made their way to the boat deck just before the lights went out. They emerged on the port side of the ship and tried to find a lifeboat. Unfortunately, by that point, the Lusitania had taken a severe list to starboard, meaning that most of the boats on the port side had swung into the Lusitania itself, making them virtually impossible to launch. The party made their way to the starboard side, where they found a boat, most likely boat 17. Avis and her companions were put in the boat, but Holbourn stayed behind. Before she went in the boat, Holbourn kissed Avis and told her to find his wife and children in Edinburgh and kiss them goodbye for him. Holbourn now made his way further aft and jumped off the ship into the sea. As he surfaced, he was horrified to see a group of men trying to jump to Avis's boat, which toppled over, tipping everyone into the sea. Holbourn could not reach them, but he thought he could see that Elvis's lifebelt was intact, which gave him hope. Meanwhile, the Lusitania finally slipped beneath the waves, sinking in less than 18 minutes. Holbourn was entangled in some ropes and other debris, but managed to free himself. He soon found another passenger struggling in the water and helped him along as they headed for lifeboat number 15, one of the few that had been launched. By the time they reached the boat, though, his companion was dead. The boat was overcrowded and they would not let him in, so he threw his manuscripts into the boat, thinking that at least some of his works would survive if he did not, and he grabbed onto a rope at the end of the lifeboat. The survivors in this boat soon spotted an abandoned one, possibly lifeboat number 1, or one of the Lusitania's collapsible boats, and rowed for it. However, due to all the people on board, it was slow going, and it took them almost 3/4 of an hour to get to this boat. At one point, Holbourn, weakening from his ordeal, asked a passenger to hold his hand, but everyone was too horrified at what had happened to do so. They finally reached the other boat and Ian was dragged in. The passengers of the 2 boats were eventually rescued by Irish fishermen and were safely brought to Queenstown, modern-day Coburg. Holbourn found that, although he could stand, he couldn't move his limbs due to his time in the water. After briefly being taken to the Cunard office in Queenstown, he was moved to the Queen's Hotel, where he was put to bed. Whenever he could, he asked desperately for information regarding Avis and whether she had survived. At 2 a.m, he finally got word that she was alive and well. When her boat had tipped over, she was sucked under by the suction of the Lusitania sinking, perhaps for as long as a minute. At that moment she had thought she was going to die, and later commented that she was rather calm about it given the circumstances. However, thanks to her life jacket, she surfaced. She swam around for a while till she grabbed onto a string, which belonged to a raft of some sort. She was spotted by a lifeboat soon after and brought aboard, later being picked up by a steamer, where she was able to get warm and have some hot milk, having personally lost only her glasses and a cardigan. Sadly, her 2 companions, Sarah Smith and Hilda Ellis, were lost in the sinking, and their bodies were never recovered. She was brought to the same hotel as Holbourn, and they reunited. Avis telegrammed her mother and her Aunt Louise to say that she was all right, writing a letter home later when they reached Dublin. On the ferry across to England, along with other Lusitania survivors, they all wore their life jackets for fear that they'd be torpedoed again. Holbourn had telegrammed his wife to meet him at the station and to bring clothes for Avis. Marion Holbourn herself had had a premonition of the disaster the night before the sinking. Interestingly, when they reached Avis's grandparents, the 2 told them that they had had a premonition of the disaster as well, but they knew that Avis would survive. Her grandfather stated that, "Depend upon it, that's our Avis." Avis and Ian would remain close friends for the next 20 years. Avis had originally planned to go to school in Scarborough, but by the time she got there, the school had been destroyed in the German raid, so she went to Edinburgh instead and made her home with the Holbourns. This school would also be destroyed in the raid, and she finally went to a boarding school in Wales. In 1916, she wrote to Holbourn that she was tired of there not being enough stories for girls of her age, so Holbourn decided to write a story called The Child of the Moat. It was a bestseller, although it was not enough to save the publisher, who went bankrupt before a second print could be issued. Holbourn continued his lecture tours, finally ending up at a permanent lecturing role at Carleton College, Minnesota in the 1920s. He made the college the largest arts college anywhere in the world at the time. Often dressed in his kilt, he became a well-known and well-loved lecturer. He once told his students that, "I do not mind if you contradict me and prove me wrong. What I do not want is my own lecture dished up again." A student replied, "But that's just what most of the other professors want." His lectures were often quoted, including this line, "Never be satisfied with what can be done. Any fool can do that. Strive to do things that can't be done." Meanwhile, Avis still lived with the Holbourns. It was at the Holbourns' house that she met the journalist Thomas Foley, a friend of the family. They married in 1926. In 1935, Holbourn went for an operation. For the first few days he seemed to be recovering, but then, suddenly, on the 13th of September, he took a turn for the worst, and sadly did not recover. As he lay dying, he said to his wife, "I think my philosophy may be counted as a real contribution. Don't you agree?" His wife assured him, and he settled into a peaceful repose. He died at the age of 62. At Carleton College, the flag was flown at half-mast. Avis, meanwhile, lived in London during the Second World War, survived the Blitz, and finally moved to Wales, where she would live out the rest of her life. She would give some interviews in her later years and in 1987 paid a visit to her old home in Canada. She died in 1996 at the age of 93. Thank you for watching. This has been the Laughing Cavalier, wishing you a good day.